and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm Emily, and this is where I love to talk about all the wholesome, cozy, sweet, often vintage or old-fashioned books that I love to read. Today's video is going to be all about the books that I read in September and October this year. And goodness me, have I read a lot. As always with these book reading wrap-up videos, I'm not going to list out the total number of books that I have read because I calculated that all up at the end of the year, which, since I'm making more videos, is going to make for a very fun video after January 1st. So I'm very much looking forward to that. But yeah, so we're just going to kind of talk over, I guess you could say, the books of note. I don't typically talk about every single book that I've read because I'm a fairly prolific reader. I read very, very quickly, and so I can get through a good number of books in a short period of time, especially now. I have he's almost 3 months now, but I have a baby that I am nursing, and so one of the things that I love to do is when I'm nursing, I'm reading, and so I'm getting a good amount of reading time in. I read all of my books on my Kindle. Pre-having babies, I was a die-hard physical copy book. You wouldn't catch me dead reading an ebook, but having babies changes things, and it is much, much easier for me to actually continue reading if I read on my Kindle. So 99.9% of my reading now is done on my Kindle. But that's neither here nor there. I have a lot of books to kind of go through. You can kind of get a peek here. That's all of my September and October. I've been reading a insane amount of Betty Neels books. She was an author that I discovered right at the end of August, and I have been loving her books. We're going to talk about those later. I'm splitting this video into two sections. The first section is going to be my non-Betty Neal book reads, and then the other section will be just kind of talking about Betty Neal's books because I have just been absolutely loving them, and I have read more than 30 in the last 2 months. I know that much. So, I might be slightly addicted, but let's just dive into it. So, September, let's see. Gotta skip all of those. I read a couple of Agatha Christie books. I read Death in the Clouds and Dead Man's Folly, Sad Cypress, Parker Pine Investigates. These are all rereads for me. I have read, at some point I need to go and get an entire list of the Agatha Christie books and then figure out which ones I've read, because I have read the vast majority of them, but I bet there's one or two that I haven't read yet that I should really try and make an effort to read. Maybe I'll do that. Then let me see. I read a lot of Betty Neels. I read The Religious Body by Catherine Aird. I'm not 100% sure. It was a Golden Age murder mystery book, which is one of my all-time favorite genres, and it was about a murder that happened in I think it's called an abbey. I was about to call it a nunnery, but I think it's just called an abbey. One of the nuns is murdered, and they have to, the detective comes in and has to figure out who done it. Oh my goodness, my brain. I enjoyed it. I thought it was pretty good. I enjoyed it enough that I read, it's the first book in a series, and I enjoyed it enough that I read the second book in the series, which is called Henrietta Who. And I really enjoyed it. The writing is really good. It's kind of a classic murder mystery. If I was in more of a murder mystery mood rather than a Betty Neals romance mood, I probably would be going through the whole series very quickly. I would like to continue reading the series, but I'm slightly distracted by other books. I do think I will come back to it. Henrietta Who, the second book in the series, I read in October, and it was really interesting because it was about a murder happens, and they find out, I'm trying to remember exactly because it's been a hot minute since I read it. Okay, that's what it is. A lady is found, she has been hit by a car, and they realize from the postmortem and stuff that she has been murdered, and they find out that she's been saying that she is Henrietta's mother, and through some circumstances they find out that maybe she's not Henrietta's mother, and they're not even sure who Henrietta's father is and who on earth is Henrietta. And so it was kind of this like dual mystery where it's like not only are they trying to figure out who done it, but they're also trying to figure out who is Henrietta. And it was really good. I quite enjoyed it. So those were pretty good. I read in September A Share in Death by Deborah Crombie. And this one is the first in another series. I was trying out a couple different series. This one's a little bit more modern day. Like there's phones and things. Well, the older books have phones. I think this one has like car phones and whatnot. So it's like a step forward. And it's the beginning of, I think it's... Oh, I can't remember the main detective guy's name. But, it's a detective guy, and his sergeant is Gemma Jones. Like, I remember that because it's alliterative. I think that's how you pronounce it, or is alliterative. I'm not sure. Doesn't matter. So, I read that one. I enjoyed it. There were a couple bits and pieces about it that I didn't love. There was just some comments that were kind of made at one point, and there were just a couple things about it that I didn't 100% love, but it was a really good book. I would be interested in reading the next books in the series. Again, I need to get over my, like, Betty Neels kick, because I can tell like it's kind of winding down now. I'm probably gonna take a break from some of her books soon, but and once I do, I can see myself picking up these series that I've kind of started and reading some more books in those series, just because it was pretty good. It was about a detective, and he goes to, through some circumstances, his cousin wasn't going to be able to use his holiday week at this timeshare, so he gives it to the detective instead. So the detective goes and has a holiday, but then a murder happens, so it ends up being a busman's holiday, which I didn't know. If you're not familiar, a busman's holiday means that you are going on holiday, but then you get stuck doing your regular job on holiday. And I didn't know that that was a thing until I read the Lord Peter Wimsey book by Dorothy L. Sayers. I can't remember which one it is. I think it's the last book in the series. I think it's called A Busman's Holiday or something. So that was kind of fun. It was like a connection. I was like, oh, I know what this means. But yeah, and then this murder happens, and he has to figure it out, and then more murders happen, and it was a pretty solid book. I did enjoy it. So I would like to come back to that and try and read more books in both of those series, and see what I think. In this first book, Gemma Jones didn't show up that much, and some of her characteristics were a bit obnoxious to me. Like, they were just like, eh. I think she would get more lovable as time goes on, but we'll see. I like the main detective dude. He seemed really nice and very sweet and a decent guy, so that's always nice. And then I read a book that was recommended to me by my mother-in-law. I'm just telling you. Have a mother and a mother-in-law that both recommend books to you. It's amazing. It's so nice. She recommended that I read Dear Henry, Love Edith by Becca Kinzer. This is another contemporary romance, which, as you may know, is not my typical cup of tea. But my mother-in-law recommended it to me. I'm not going to turn that down. So I read it. I would probably say, if I was being perfectly, brutally honest, it maybe would get 3 stars for me. It was an okay book. It was kind of fun. There were some parts about it that I did enjoy, but there were other parts that just kind of dragged on, and I felt like the second half of the book was much too long. It just kind of was like, come on, can we like get to the point of the story, sort of a thing. So that was that. Basically, I'm terrible at giving summaries of books. I should really work on that. But Edith is needing a place to stay over the summer because she's planning to go to Africa to volunteer. She's a nurse, to volunteer over in Africa at a mission something. I think it was a mission. It's just like to volunteer to help with nursing stuff over in Africa. But over the summer, she's coming to the small town where she's going to be helping at a crisis center house. It's basically childcare for people that need it sort of last minute, or for children that are found in not great situations. And so through connections and whatnot, she's going to be staying at Henry's house. And for the longest time, they don't meet each other. And based off of things, Edith is a widow, and she's going to be working at this crisis center, and Henry has an injury to his knee, and so he's like limping around and stuff. They start like writing notes back and forth to each other, and they both are under the misapprehension that, I think that's the right word for that situation, they both think that they are each elderly. Edith thinks Henry is elderly. Henry thinks Edith is elderly. And so there's kind of this miscommunication between the two. And so that kind of plays into the story, and then eventually they find out that they're not, and blah, blah, blah. So it's fun. There were some parts, like I said, that were a bit over the top for me, where it was like these different scenes of like miscommunication where she's like talking to someone, because it's like a small town, like a small American town, and so she'll be talking to somebody, and then it gets like torn way out of proportion, and it just over the top, kind of silly almost. Those kind of bugged me a little bit. And then, like I said, the second half of the book kind of just like drags on and annoyed me a bit, just because it was this whole thing of like, okay, this is not a spoiler to say, like, Edith and Henry are the romantic interests of the book. And in the second half of the book, Edith is just like, no, I can't be in a relationship with you because I have to go and fulfill my dream of going to Africa. That's fine. But it was almost in some ways like she was saying that, like, getting married and staying with him was less of an adventure. It was like lesser. Like, he wasn't worth it, sort of a thing. And that like bugged me a little bit. I was like, oh, if you like somebody, you don't like act like that. Ugh. That's just me. That's just my personal opinion. But it was an okay book. It was kind of fun. Would I read it again? No. And I don't know if I'm really much interested in reading other books by the author, but I'm not going to say I would never read another one of her books. So there's that one. And then, one second, I have to check and see if my baby's awake. He was awake. So, now I have a little buddy with me. We'll see how this goes. If he gets too fussy, I'll probably have to pause and film another section later. But yeah, so that was, what was it? Dear Henry, Love, Edith. And then, let's see, more Betty Neels books, more Betty Neels books. I read Fairest of Heart by Karen Witemeyer. This is a book that I've actually been wanting to read for a good while. I'd seen that my library was supposed to have it, and I tried to get a physical copy of it several times, and then every time I would go and look on the shelves, it wasn't there. It would say it was available in the library, and I would look everywhere. I would look in the new book section, I would look in, like, you know, the Christian romance section, and the regular romance section, and the large print, like, everywhere. I could never find this book. And I'm one of those people and I really prefer not to have to talk to anybody. And I wasn't so set on getting it that I wanted to go and try and find a librarian. I don't know if you saw that. He was kind of down the corner. The truck drove by and it startled him. He's one of the most easily startled babies that I think I've ever been around. It's pretty entertaining sometimes. My husband was holding him last night and sneezed, and poor little guy thought the world was ending. He like wailed and cried for like 10 minutes. It was kind of entertaining. Not that he was upset, but just how startled he got. Anyway, so Fairest of Heart. It is a Snow White retelling set in the American West. And Karen Witemeyer is a Christian romance author. I have read a number of her books before. The first book that I ever read by her was Short Straw Bride, and I really, really liked that story. I've read it a couple times, I think, and that one I think is very, very good. Fairest of Heart was good. It's the story of, oh goodness me, what's the main girl's name now? I can't can't remember her name, but it's Snow White, you know. She is the maid for this actress who's very much like a diva, like horrible lady, the evil queen, and she. I'm trying to think of how much to say without like completely spoiling it, because it's like Snow White. Like pretty much everybody knows the story of Snow White, and it's where, you know, the evil queen feels threatened by the young, sweet, innocent girl, and so she sends her off into the woods with the huntsman. The huntsman is supposed to kill her. Basically, that pretty much all of that happens, but like in a Western Texas like retelling. It's a retelling, like, goodness gracious. I'm not very good at this, am I? So basically, she ends up on this ranch with 7 old men, and it was kind of, they're all, like, retired cowboys, basically. And the main guy love interest is a Texas Ranger. And it's pretty good. I was kind of annoyed. I felt like she made the main lady, Snow White lady, way too perfect. Like, obnoxiously perfect. She had like no faults. Like, she never did like anything really wrong at all. And she was like super forgiving and really kind, and she was just, she never like lost her temper, like nothing. She was a very one-dimensional character. I hadn't thought of it that way before, but that is exactly how I would describe it. She just was not that interesting. So that was kind of annoying. I really did like that there was all the old guys instead of dwarves. It was kind of fun. As I've mentioned before on my channel, I'm a big fan of Louis L'Amour, which actually, since I've rearranged my bookshelves, this is my Louis L'Amour book collection that I'm steadily growing. I love Old West stories, and so I've tried to read a few like cowboy romances before, and most of them are solidly mediocre. I just don't care for them. I think the one that I've actually really, really enjoyed was, it's the first book in like, what's it called? It's Lorraine Heath, and it's like her Texas whatever, it's like 3 brothers, and then there's 3 books, one for each brother, sort of a thing. And the first book in the series I really, really enjoyed. It didn't end up having like one sort of like a spicy scene closer to the end that I didn't love, but the overall story was like really good. I really enjoyed it. So but back to the topic at hand. That's why I was intrigued to read this book, Fairest of Heart, was because it was a Texas retelling, like a Western retelling of fairy tales. I was like, oh, that's such a good idea. So I didn't hate it. Like I said, I think the main girl character was too perfect, and I thought that it was a little preachy. This is kind of my one beef with a lot of romantic Christian romances. I'm a conservative Christian, but when I'm reading these romance books, it's almost like they're trying to preach a sermon in the books, and it just feels so overdone, and like they're trying to push it so much that it just feels fake, and I don't love that. So that was kind of annoying. I feel like her first one, Short Straw Bride, didn't have it as much, or the first one of her books that I read did not have that as much. So maybe it just differs from book to book of hers. I'm not entirely sure. But I do enjoy Karen Witmeyer's writing. I think that she comes up with kind of fun stories and clever writing, or clever stories and good writing. And yeah, overall, it was a fun book. I don't know if I would be like, oh yeah, I'm going to read it again. And I'm looking at reading the next book in the series, because she's got a whole, it's like a whole fairy tale retelling series, and I'll mostly read it because it's fairy tale retellings and I really like those, but I'm not in any huge rush to get to it. If that makes sense. And I think that's pretty much everything that I wanted to say about it. It was fun, but it could have been better. So there was that one, and then let me see here. I read Miraculous Mysteries, which is one of the British Library Crime Classics short story collections. That one was really fun. I love those books. Honestly, there's so many of the British Library Crime Classic books that I don't think I could ever own, like the whole collection, but I would really love to collect physical copies of all of the short story collections. I love them so much. So much. I have thoroughly enjoyed them. Then I read A Beautiful Disguise by Rosanna M. White. It was pretty good. It's basically this brother and sister. Their father spent all of their money, so when he died, they realized that they were destitute, and so they started up this company called Imposters Limited, I think is what it was, where they investigate things for the wealthy people. This one was set in 1909, I think, so like early 1900s. And Colonel Merrick, I think he was it Lieutenant Merrick? He is a soldier who got pneumonia while he was serving. He's supposed to be like guarding the king or something, so he was outside in the wind and rain and snow and blah blah blah, and he got pneumonia very badly. And so he was transferred to like a desk job, and then he's not healing very well, so they send him on holiday, and he also gets injured doing something else in the book. And so he hires the Imposters Limited company to investigate one of his superiors at his work, who he is wondering if he is a spy, if he's selling British secrets to the Germans, because this is like pre-World War I. And so he hires them. Nobody in the, I guess, elite of society, all the rich people, the lords and ladies and yada yada, they don't know who the Imposters Limited is run by, and it is run by this brother and sister who are technically part of the social elite, but they are destitute. They're doing this to earn money, and so they are playing two roles, if you will. It was a fun book. I enjoyed it. It took me a lot to get through it, and I think part of that is because, again, I've been reading all these Betty Neels books. I can read one of those books in about a day, and so they're very quick and easy reads, and I love that, especially in this season of my life right now. That is one of the things that I love so much about those books, is they're very easy reads. And A Beautiful Disguise was not as much. It took a lot more to get through it. I thought the characters were pretty good. That's what it was. The thing that annoyed me probably the most about it was that they have like, they're not curse words exactly, but they're like their exclamations or whatever were very repetitive. So Merrick, the main guy, he used blasted, I think, as like his like curse word of choice, if you will. And then the main girl, Marigold, she uses lion feathers. And she would be like, oh, lion feathers or whatever. They, like, never changed it up throughout the whole book. And I was just like, this is so obnoxious and repetitive. Like, come on, like, be a little more creative. Think of something else here, okay? Like, so that was like a tiny thing, but it was like a little bit of a pet peeve. It was like every time it would come up, I was just like, oh, gosh, people. You're smarter than this. So that was like a very minor thing, but it was just like irksome. And there's another book that I just read that did the same thing, where they just reuse the same exclamation word every time, and I'm like, come on. So I think that's about all that I want to say about it. I thought it was an interesting premise where it's mixing kind of Regency, or it's not Regency, it's mixing romance with like mystery, like solving mysteries and stuff. And I kind of guessed what was at the end of the mystery solution was going to be, but it was more like 60 or 70% of the way through. I thought the middle of the book kind of dragged a bit, where it was just like, oh, come on. And then finally, when I got to like the 75-80% of the way through the book, I was like, okay, like the story was like picking up, and I was like, okay, we're getting good. And then I quickly finished it. It was just like getting to that point was a bit of like a ugh. So I enjoyed it. I think I'll probably try out the rest of the series. Again, this is the first book in the series. I thought it was pretty fun, but Yeah, and there was, again, this is another Christian author. I thought she did a bit of a better job in not making it too preachy. I thought it was more well done. Yeah. Some of it was still a little bit too much for me, but I don't know. Like, part of me is like, I don't know exactly what I would want from a Christian book, because I don't mind it being in there, definitely. But sometimes it just seems like too much. But I think that A Beautiful Disguise did okay. Like, it wasn't too bad. And then, let me see, is everything else that I read? It's all Betty Neels, guys. Okay, yep. Alright, it's all Betty Neels. So that's kind of a roundup of like what I read in September and October that was not Betty Neels books. So now we can talk about Betty Neels books. Oh my goodness, I am just in love with them. I enjoy them so much. They are very much sweet, wholesome romances. They are spice free. The most that ever happens is hand holding or hugging or kissing. Like, that's it, which I appreciate. Like, they're just very sweet and wholesome. Usually said kissing and stuff doesn't happen much until like the end of the book. Sometimes the guy will kiss the girl. Actually, that's not true. And pretty much every single one of them, at some point in the book, he'll kiss her, but there's no like romantic, passionate, whatever scenes, passionate necking until like right at the end of the books. So, like I said, I've read more than 30 of them in the last couple of months, and they all basically have the exact same plot line. There is a girl. Sometimes she's pretty and beautiful, but often she is described as like kind of a plain girl. Like, she's not like a raving beauty, which is like something that I really appreciate about it, is that she's not this super like hot young thing, if you will. She's like a normal person. So I appreciate that, and oftentimes they're described as having mousy colored hair, which when I was younger I very much had like that kind of grayish brown hair. It's definitely darkened up as I've gotten older, so now it's more like brown, but when I was in my teen years and stuff, it was kind of like grayish mousy brown, and so I like identified with that a little bit. So I appreciate that the girls are not always super hot. They're just normal, again, like normal pretty girls. They're often described as having beautiful eyes. So the main girl character is often, not always, but often a nurse, and the main guy character 99% of the time is a very tall, large Dutch doctor or professor or doctor. So often he's a Dutch doctor or a Dutch professor doctor, or he's a doctor, like without the Dutch part. But most of the time it's Dutch. Which is really funny and sweet, I think, because I looked it up, and Betty Neels' husband, Betty Neels was a nurse, so that's probably why she often has nurse characters, and her husband was Dutch. It doesn't say whether or not he was a doctor, but I was just like, that is so sweet and cute, because in my mind that means she's probably basing all of these guys off of her husband, which I was just like, that's so romantic and cute and charming. So typically they meet through some accidental circumstance or whatever, and they, start at some point, like they keep bumping into each other, and then at some point one or the other of them realizes they're in love, and then blah 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 blah, stuff happens, and then finally in the end they get together. Very, like I said, repetitive. Like, pretty much everyone has the exact same plot line. I love that. That is something that I actually really enjoy. That's one of the reasons why the Redwall series by Brian Jakes is one of my all-time favorite series. They all have like the same plot line, so it's very predictable. I am not somebody that loves a lot of like shocking, dramatic love triangles and this and that and the other. Like, no, that stresses me out. So I really enjoy the fact that I know exactly what I'm getting from a Betty Neels books. It's going to be the same thing every time. Again, like I said, they're very, very easy reads. I really love how quickly I can read them. I was telling my husband that one of the reasons why I enjoy them so much right now is just because my brain capacity, having a new baby and a toddler and trying to keep up with the house and doing all the stuff, and I've had like some postpartum hormones and stuff going on, so it's just like with all of that extra stuff cluttering up my brain, it's really nice to have something that's very simple and repetitive to read, but you know, like it's different characters, different circumstances a little bit, but the basic plot is the same. I really enjoy that in the books they talk a lot about clothes, and they like describe, like the girl will talk about like, oh, she has to go and get like a new dress or a new skirt, or she has nothing presentable to wear for a dinner party, and like every single book there's talk about clothes, and I love that. I learned how to sew on a sewing machine, to sew my own clothes when I was like 17, 18, and for years, until I had started having children, I was sewing like the vast majority of my wardrobe, and I've always been really interested in like vintage fashion and stuff, and so it's so nice like reading in the book about that. It kind of scratches that itch a little bit. Since having kids, with my body changing and stuff, with being pregnant and then not pregnant but then nursing, and so everything is like fluctuating and changing, clothes have been a lot more challenging, and I have not been sewing hardly as much in the last 2-3 years, but I'm trying to get back into it. So that's just like a fun, for me personally, I really enjoy that they talk a lot about their clothes and what they're wearing and the skirts they're gonna get and the top and like this and that and the other. It's so fun. And then let me see, I wrote a list of like, these are all the things that I really like about it, and then I have like this one thing that I don't love about it. So let me see. Oh, this is kind of a silly thing, but in the book oftentimes there will be some other like romantic interest, if you will. Like the doctor's been dating this other girl, and he's not really in love with her at all. He's just like, she would make a suitable wife for me. Like, this is just a practical thing. These other side characters are always like horrible. They're terrible people. Like they're bratty and immature and like just rude, like really, really rude. They'll say like mean things to the main girl and stuff. And I like that because I personally hate love triangles where it's like they're actually like in love with both people, sort of a thing. And they're both like really nice people, and they're like, oh, how are they gonna choose? I hate that. I hate that so much. And so I really appreciate the fact that like the other interests, sometimes there'll be like another guy that's interested in the main girl, and she's just like, no thank you. And he's usually like an obnoxious, boorish, terrible guy. And I just really enjoy that because there's no emotional attachment to this character. They're just, you don't care. You're glad that they're getting like, not jilted or anything necessarily. Sometimes it's a little bit of jilting because the doctor is like, oh wait, I don't want to be engaged to you. But most of the time he's not even engaged to this other girl. He's just been taking her out, and she's mercenary, so she's not in love with him either. She's just with him for the money, because that's the other thing. That was the other reoccurring thing. This Dutch doctor guy is always like fabulously wealthy, like insanely so. And another fun thing is that, I don't know if Betty Neels really liked cars or what, but she always talks about like what car the doctor drives, and it'll be like, oh, it was a Rolls Royce, or oh, it was a Bentley, or there's been a couple times where she gives like the specific like model name of the car, and there was one I had to look it up. It's like a Panther J something. I'm gonna pop a picture of it up here because I had to look it up because I was just so curious. It's such a classy car. I'm not a car person at all, but that's a classy car. I would take that car in a heartbeat. Because apparently it was a 70s does 30s thing where they remade it in like the 70s or 80s based off of like a 30s model. It's like Cruella de Vil's car. And there were only like 360 of them made or something. And I was just like, that's so cool. Like, I never would have looked that up or known anything about it if it were not for Betty Neels. So that was kind of a fun thing. And then I think that's pretty much like all the main points about it. I have on my list here, they talk about clothes. I like that. They're very predictable. Love that. They're really sweet and wholesome. Like, just the whole romantic aspect of it and whatnot is very sweet. The girl is often not a raving beauty. I just like that she's a normal person. The other romantic interest is always a horrible person. Love that. And then again, easy reads, flowing writing style. Like, it moves quickly. I can read it quickly. They're not very long to begin with. It's really nice. Okay, so the main con that I have for these books, not all the books, but in a lot of them, like, the main guy is almost like, he's really abrupt and like a little bit snobby sometimes, and like sometimes the things that he says are like a little bit mean. And that makes it sound like he's a horrible guy, and he's not. Like, he's really nice. But in some books it's more exaggerated than others. There was one that I just read where it just seemed like he was so mean to her sometimes. And like, and what I mean by that is and this is again in all the books, they don't talk about their personal life, and so the main girl will say something about like, oh, you're engaged or you're going to get married to this other lady or whatever, and they get all like, how dare you ask me such a personal question type of a thing. When he's like taking the main girl out to dinner and stuff, it's like, she has a right to know if you're like marrying this other girl and like flirting with her. Like, oh my goodness. So sometimes that's a bit much, and it's a little bit annoying, and so I've been kind of keeping track of the books where it's not as much that, where he's just really nice and kind, and it's just in some of the books. Some of the books it's like a balance where he's like a little bit snooty but also like really nice, and then there was one that I just read, I can't remember which one it was exactly, where it seemed like he was just so mean, and then he was like so shocked that she got upset at him because like she should know that he liked her, sort of a thing. It was just that one annoyed me a little bit. I was just like, come on, dude, like what is she supposed to think? And so it was almost like she half ends up like apologizing to him for misreading the situation, sort of a thing, when he could have just told her like, no, I'm not marrying this lady, like she was the wife of my really good friend, end of story. Moving on. But for the most part that doesn't happen. So yeah, I think that's about all that I have to say about these books. I absolutely love them. I can see that I'm going to be reading more of them. Betty Neels apparently wrote like 134 books or something, so I've got a ways to go. I've got a lot of them still to read, and thankfully my library has a ton of them available for ebooks, and then I through the Libby app, and then they also have Hoopla, which has a bunch more of them. So between the two of them, I'm like set for a good while. And my plan is I'm gonna keep track of the ones that I like really loved, and then I'm gonna start trying to like track those down to like buy physical copies of them. I'm excited about it. But anyway, this is going to be a very long video. It looks like we're probably going to be getting close to like 45 minutes long. That is a roundup of what I read for September and October. I would love to know what you're reading. I've been reading a couple other non-Betty Neels books. Right now I'm reading Kit McBride Gets a Wife. I think it's by Anne Berry. This is a very random book. I was watching a knitting podcast on YouTube, and the lady I was watching said that she had just finished reading it, and I was like, ooh, this sounds intriguing. It's kind of reminding me of Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, if you know that movie. It's a vintage movie with Howard Keel and, oh, her name escapes me. One of my all-time favorite actresses. It's a vintage movie. Anyway, I'm okay with it for right now. I'm enjoying it so far. One of the characters is incredibly obnoxious and needs a good whooping, but we'll see how I like. I'll report back to you for my November wrap-up. But yeah, I would love to know what you're reading and what you're enjoying. I'm thinking about making a video that will be books that you guys have all suggested. I have gotten some really interesting sounding suggestions in the comments. I'm terrible at responding to comments right now, guys. I'm sorry about that. I'm just busy, and it takes so much of my brain space to like sit down and respond to them. But I do really love reading through the comments, and I've been really intrigued by a number of the books that have been recommended, and so I think I want to try and make a video, like a reading vlog style video, of reading some of the books that you guys have recommended, so stay tuned for that. I think that would be really, really fun to do. But yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and wrap things up. I hope you've enjoyed this video, enjoyed hearing what I've been reading, and I am looking forward to seeing you on the next one. Bye!